Hi everyone. So tonight we will be discussing Chapter 6, Ethical Decisions and Challenges. So while many individuals study ethics from a theoretical perspective alone, great value can be gained when individuals apply ethics to the situations that confront them. The number and types of challenges confronting the HIM profession are almost limitless. Personal matters, conflicts of interest, the pressure on healthcare providers to remain fiscally solvent, and the connection between coding and reimbursement, and the protection of sensitive information all pose ethical issues for HIM professionals to resolve. Recognizing ethical challenges and learning how to address them through the decision-making process will be the main focus of this chapter. Every person will face many ethical dilemmas throughout their life and are going to be forced to reach a decision about these dilemmas. Some of these decisions will be made on an individual level, affecting professional or personal life, while others will be made on an organizational or group level that affect many others. The quality of the ethical decision reached may vary greatly, depending in large measure on the factors that influence the individual and the process he or she chooses to follow. There is no one universal right answer that exists that can be applied to every situation. Decisions reached at one stage in life may be challenged later in life by new problems and new realities that confront the decision maker. Accordingly, the decision maker must examine what factors influence his or her decision making and what process they will follow if they are to be well equipped for future decision making. Now, there are several factors that influence the ethical decision-making process. One person may rely on a particular ethical concept or theory to reach a decision, while another person may rely on their religious beliefs. Others, in addition, may rely on personal experiences or may look to a professional code of ethics to guide them. Whether an individual relies on one factor or a combination of factors, it is important to recognize that the individual does not operate in a vacuum when reaching a decision. Many factors influence the decision-making process, including those that we will be discussing here. It could be a professional code of ethics, their ethical concepts or theories, patients' rights, religious beliefs, as well as personal experiences. Now, one of the most significant features of professional associations is their codes of ethics. With AHIMA, Association for Health Information Management Association, we also have a code of ethics that can be located on AHIMA's direct website. So what in the world is a code of ethics? Okay, so code of ethics are a written list of a profession's values and standards of conduct. The code of ethics are important because they identify for their broader community what the professional association defines as the basic ethical and moral standards to which its members must adhere to. These ethical and moral standards are to be used by the profession's membership as the guiding principles that govern their conduct. Now, the code of conduct embody many different concepts. One is that the members of the profession differentiate themselves from the broader group of occupations and technical careers that do exist in the working world. These ethics codes also show that the professional is an autonomous, responsible decision maker, not someone who just follows orders. A related concept is that the professional possesses a loyalty to both the client and the patient and to fellow members of the profession. Within this concept, it is implied promise that the practitioner, who's governed by an ethical code, will not pursue his own interests at expense of a client or a patient. Balanced with this promise is the professional's loyalty to fellow members of the profession, which manifests in both positive ways and negative ways, where the professional must choose between his loyalty to a client or a patient and his loyalty to other members of the profession. Code of ethics elevate the client or patient above the interests of fellow professionals. Codes of ethics are living documents in the sense that they are open to change over a period of time. Historically, it was more of a statement that limited competition and promoted images and imposed restrictions. In modern times, code of ethics have really transformed to be statements of ethical and moral principles that govern the conduct of the profession's members. There's almost every professional association has some form of ethics code. For example, AOA, AHIMA, medical associations, nursing associations, and so on. Physicians also have a physician code of ethics that they are responsible for following. It includes that they're obligated to provide competent medical service to their patients. They are going to hold confidential communication with patients. They have a duty to their patients to study and advance scientific knowledge. They recognize patients' right to choose a physician, and they must not discriminate. Health information managers in HIM world, ethics is a cornerstone of the profession. As I had mentioned earlier, AHIMA has a long history of the code of ethics, and HIM has ethical obligations that they need to be aware of and really comply with. This is obligations to the patient, other members of the healthcare team, to his or her own professional association, in this case it would be AHIMA, to the public, as well as to him or herself. Some influencing factors of code of ethics is that effective communication is the key to success. Professional education requires the applicability of code in workplace, consequences of unethical behavior in case code of ethics are not followed, and as well as taking every patient and every case really on a case-by-case analysis. A successful approach stresses the need to think for oneself. Now, the code of ethics, like all forms of communications, are more effective if they are enforced than if they are merely statements posted on the wall. One of the most effective means to enforce an ethics code is to use an ethics committee. Now, an ethics committee is a group that's formed within a healthcare organization that establishes new and evaluate existing ethical codes and incorporate policies to address ethical issues that would arise in the workplace. The functions of the ethics committee may vary from organization to organization, with some committees focusing on communicating information and others focusing on classifying and interpreting ethical issues, and even still others who could focus on compliance within the organization's ethics code. Regardless of the extent of their function, ethics committees contribute to the discussion and debate of ethical issues in their organizations. Within healthcare organizations, ethics committees often perform philosophical and practical functions. For example, an ethics committee may discuss some bioethical issues. This could include end-of-life decision-making support, treatment of seriously ill newborns, procedures for organ procurement, as well as medical research, new treatments, and equipment. One of the most significant developments in the last 50 years has been the recognition that patients are not merely passive participants in the delivery of healthcare. Instead, they play an integral role in their own treatment. The extent to which the patient has played a role in his own healthcare and treatment has varied over time. Patients have always played some type of role in their treatment, initially with the decision to even seek care and later with the decision to comply with the advice of a treating physician. The participation has been limited to some extent by the way in which the healthcare delivery system in the U.S. operates. In many respects, the patients cannot enter a healthcare organization for treatment without the express approval of a physician, save for emergency medical care. Although a patient could for many years control who became his or her healthcare provider, some patients have seen this control limited by the event of their health insurance organization. Okay? Some health organization, some health insurance organizations, so like a health maintenance organization, an HMO, as opposed to a preferred provider organization, a PPO, requires that a patient selects a healthcare provider from a pre-approved list. Payment for healthcare services also may limit a patient's participation, since many insurances generally control funding and not the patient. The control over who gets paid, how much they will be paid, and when payments will be made often influences the level of service a patient may receive. Though a patient's role in healthcare has varied, a general recognition that a patient possesses certain healthcare rights emerged simultaneously with two developments. The developments being a rise of consumer culture and a movement away from paternalism in healthcare. These two developments derive from several different circumstances, including increased levels of education in the U.S., dissatisfaction with the way things were run, and an inaction or lax oversight by regulatory agencies. Consumers, the patients of healthcare, began to focus on healthcare, demanding higher quality care and a larger say in its delivery. Patient rights are essentially the recognition that a patient is entitled to determine for him or herself the extent to which they will receive or forego care and treatment. One aspect of this recognition began to occur in the form of provisions found in the Ethics Code of Professional Association in the 1950s. Wider recognition did not occur until the 1970s with the advent of the American Hospital Association, the AHA's publication of the Patient's Bill of Rights. The Patient Bill of Rights is a document that initially served to express to the patient the existence of such rights as privacy, confidentiality, and informed consent. In later revisions, provisions were added concerning the healthcare provider's responsibilities to the patient, such as the expectation that a hospital will reasonably respond to the patient's request for appropriate and medically indicated care and services. In its current iteration, this document is referred to as the Patient Care Partnership, emphasizing the collaborative nature of healthcare in the 21st century. This document continues to emphasize patients' rights and also explains what a patient may expect during their hospital stay and how they can express any concerns over his care. Although patient rights have generally been viewed from an ethical context, they also can be viewed from a legal context. Some states have formalized the concept of patient rights into statutory provisions. In the U.S., Congress has repeatedly attempted to pass a statute incorporating the full concept of patient rights into federal law. By taking such action, these legislative bodies attempt to change the consequences for failing to honor patient rights from one of an ethical breach with limited opportunities for redress to one of a legal breach that can result in penalties enforced by law. One of the most successful efforts in moving the concept of patient rights from an ethical basis to a legal basis is the Federal Patient Self-Determination Act, the PSDA. The goal of Congress in passing the PSDA is to ensure that a patient's right to self-determination in healthcare decisions be communicated and protected. The PSDA obligates healthcare providers who are Medicare or Medicaid certified to inform their patients of the status of state law governing a patient's rights to make advance directives for accepting or refusing healthcare services, as well as the healthcare provider's written policies concerning the implementation of patients' rights. By placing this obligation on healthcare providers, the law recognizes that it is the patient's right to determine the extent of the healthcare services that they will receive, not the exclusive right of the healthcare provider. Another example of granting patient rights at the federal level is the Privacy Rule that was issued pursuant to the HIPAA Act of 1996. HIPAA stands for the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, and its focus is on new rights granted to patients pursuant under HIPAA. In addition to offering confidentiality protections to patient information, the privacy rule also has several rights to patients pertinent to their health information. These rights include, but are not limited to, the right to be informed of the uses and disclosures of this information, the right to restrict uses or disclosures of their information, the right to amend their information, and the right to inspect and copy their information. In 2009, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was passed by Congress. The ARRA reinforces patients' rights of access to their own health information when a health record is in an electronic form. Under the ARRA, patients have the right to obtain a copy of their protected health information electronically if care was received from a covered entity that uses or maintains an electronic health record. ARRA further states that at a patient's direction, the covered entity must transmit a copy of this information to an entity or a person so designated by the patient, provided such designation is clear, conspicuous, and specific. Patient rights concerning health information are also subject of a patient's right document that's published by AHIMA and available on their website. Overall, the concept of patient rights influences ethical decision-making in the sense that healthcare providers must consider a patient rights as one element in the decision-making process. By recognizing these rights, a healthcare provider sees the patient as a stakeholder whose values are important. Accordingly, the patient's interest must be weighed heavily in each and every decision. Whereas the Code of Ethics and the concept of patient rights are significant factors in the decision-making process, there are also a variety of other factors that can also play a role. The extent to which an individual considers these factors depends upon the value that the decision maker places on them. For example, for generations, religious beliefs and philosophical views have served as the centerpiece for values cherished by many. Some ethical dilemmas are seen through these frameworks. Advances in science and technology also play a role in ethical decision making. New medical devices, surgical techniques, treatment modalities, and pharmaceutical creations have not only enhanced the quality and length of life, but they also have created some new ethical dilemmas. Legal factors also influence the ethical decision-making process. Ethical standards, the legal and ethical issues are often closely related. Ethical questions may spur subsequent legal action. Just as ethical challenges come in many forms, solving these ethical challenges may take many forms as well. Decisions may be reached individually or as a group, or may be the result of consensus building or negotiations. These decisions do not stand alone, since decisions made in one aspect of an ethical situation may affect other aspects of the same problem. This figure below provides an example of relationships between different aspects of a fictional ethical problem. There are several steps included in the ethical decision-making process. Included in the initial steps are defining the ethical issue clearly and determining the facts. The defining step involves identifying and clarifying the problem presented and examining what values are in conflict. Determining the facts can then be accomplished by gathering data. Data gathering can occur by speaking with others who may have information about the situation or by reviewing relevant records. Once the problem is clearly defined and data is gathered, one can then determine who has a stake in making this decision. The information that's gleaned at each of these prior steps leads to a determination of the options available to the decision maker. These options should be examined thoroughly, looking at both the short and long-term outcomes each option will reach and their impact upon each person or group involved. Each option can be compared against an ethical theory for guidance in the decision-making process. For example, which option presents the greatest good for the greatest number, which is utilitarianism? Which option supports doing one's duty, which is deontology? And which option promotes the rights and dignity of all people, which is social equality and justice? By linking an ethical theory with each option, a decision maker clarifies the basis supporting each one. After weighing each option, the decision maker must then reach a decision and act upon it. Choosing the course of action is not always easy and sometimes is fraught with difficulty. Some questions that you should ask yourself: are there legal implications? What option makes the most sense? Can you sleep at night with this choice? Once the decision is implemented, a decision maker must then evaluate the outcome and compare the actual outcome against the predicted outcome. When the actual outcome is unforeseen, a decision maker can then evaluate what he may have missed in the data gathering and option generation stages and learn from this for future references. If steps can be taken to prevent the ethical problem from reoccurring, the decision maker should engage in these actions. The decision maker may wish to record the entire situation for use in the future as part of an educational program or dissemination to a wider audience. Ethical challenges are situations in which no clear-cut right answer exists, and an individual is required to make a choice between two or more equally unfavorable alternatives, or between a neutral alternative and a tempting but unfavorable alternative. The choice may center on a conflict between the individual rights of two separate people, on a conflict between the obligations of one person and the rights of another person, or some combination of these. Honest differences of opinion between sincere and virtuous people may lead to frustration over how to make the right choice. Perfect solutions may not exist for every ethical dilemma, and the person who has made a choice may have to define his decision later to others. There are general challenges in a workplace, which we'll discuss in a little bit, but these, for the most part, include conflict of interest, impaired colleague, disparagement, and truth-telling and disclosure. One of the most significant ethical challenges that may be encountered in any endeavor is the conflict of interest. A conflict of interest is clash between an individual's selfish interests and his obligations to an organization or group. Such conflicts exist when an individual uses his position or within an organization or group to promote his own interests or those with whom he's closely aligned to at the expense of the best interests of the organization or a group as a whole. Conflicts of interest are sometimes addressed by company policy, such as prohibiting any secondary employment with a competitor. A second ethical concern is the issue of substance abuse in the workplace. Those colleagues who can no longer function appropriately in the workplace due to substance abuse such as alcohol or drugs are often referred to as impaired colleagues. Impaired colleagues may impede business performance, pose safety risks to both themselves, the organization, and fellow workers, and engage in unethical and illegal conduct such as embezzling to support a drug habit. No easy answers exist for how to deal with such a situation. A third ethical challenge involves disparagement, which means the belittling or criticizing of the skills, knowledge, or qualifications of another professional. The concept of disparagement is included in the Code of Ethics of some professions. Engaging in disparagement is considered by many to be a professional misconduct. Whereas each of the conflicts that were just addressed may not occur with frequency, There are other ethical challenges that seem to arise on almost a daily basis. It seems that questions concerning truth-telling abound in the workplace as well, with some instances that are more severe than others. For example, personal memos and daily conversations with coworkers may involve shading of the truth or lack of full disclosure. Some advertising messages may cross the boundary of puffery into outright deceptive communications. Some businesses may not meet their obligations to disclose to government entities all of the information that's required by statute, reasoning that the less information given, the better in light of competitive pressures. Some government entities may not disclose all of the information that's requested by reporters or members of the public, citing concerns of national defense or security. Some employees may copy another employee's work and plagiarize, such as planning a document or submitting someone else's work as their own. Where these practices are seen as lying, lack of full disclosure, or plagiarism, the practices lead to the erosion of trust in the workplace, a matter of vital importance to organizations that rely on honesty and dependability to conduct ordinary business exchanges. Any manager or director has to recognize that ethical issues extend beyond concerns for his own personal conduct into their supervisory position. The supervisor plays 3 direct ethical roles in an organization. They serve as a role model, they encourage ethical behavior, and monitor employee conduct. Okay? These 3 roles require increased accountability from supervisors, causing them to be more alert to ethical issues than they otherwise might be. Serving as a role model requires the supervisor to engage in ethical behaviors that can be emulated by others. Another role model behavior involves accepting responsibility for mistakes, and through role modeling can be an effective means of influencing staff behaviors. Supervisors play a separate ethical role in an organization as well, as they encourage staff to engage in ethical behavior through supervisory actions. In addition to encouraging ethical behavior through policies, procedures, supervisors may influence behavior using rewards and punishment. Although role modeling and encouragement may influence staff to behave in an ethical manner, staff may not consistently do so, and for that reason, a supervisory function exists. They have to monitor the employee conduct. Ethical challenges can be found in numerous places and in differing situations within the general healthcare field. The ethical challenges that we address here have been the subject of considerable discussion in the last 20 years within the healthcare industry. So conflict of interest exists in healthcare field just as they do in the business arena. For example, doctors may engage in joint venturing or self-referral practices that can raise a question of a conflict of interest. Okay? Substance abuse and impaired colleagues is present in healthcare and is particularly troubling because of the increased risk to patient safety. Financial issues also exist. Financing of healthcare influences ethics. Third-party payers may affect clinical decisions of some doctors by authorizing inpatient stays for a shorter time period than the doctor thinks is medically prudent, thereby exposing the patient to the potential discharge from the hospital in a seriously ill condition. Okay? And we also have bioethical issues at hand that we have to be aware of. The HIM field has evolved over a period of time, and new ethical challenges have emerged. These challenges have generally arisen from changes in the healthcare environment, like the development of managed care, requirements for documentation and access to and release of information, the development in technology, including the ease of sharing information electronically, and changes in reimbursement systems. The most frequent ethical challenges center on the coding reimbursement connection, quality review, information security, data resource management, and the protection of sensitive information, including genetic, drug, and alcohol abuse, mental health, and sexual abuse information. Of these, the most substantial numbers of recent ethical challenges have focused on the coding reimbursement connection and the protection of sensitive information. The documentation, access to, and release of information needs to be carefully watched. Access to sensitive patient information, celebrity patients, and demands from third parties, including insurers and vendors, all have resulted in an increased demand for patient information. Overall, in HIM, a lot of different ethical challenges have arisen due to the new technological advancements in the workplace and within the world as a whole. And changes in reimbursement systems have also been on the rise with this change from ICD-9 to ICD-10, for example, and the different pressure for maximizing reimbursements across the healthcare organizations today. So, in conclusion, code of ethics, patient rights, religious beliefs, scientific advances have all played a role in influencing ethical decision making. Understanding these influences and the complexity of the ethical decision-making process will assist you when faced with ethical challenges. I encourage everyone to review Chapter 6, Ethical Decisions and Challenges in the textbook. And after this, if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me.